The call came at 2 in the morning, shattering the silence of my San Francisco apartment like a gunshot. I was still awake, hunched over 3 monitors debugging a particularly nasty piece of code for the security software my company was developing. The screen's blue glow had been my only companion for hours, and I'd almost forgotten the world existed beyond those lines of code. Mrs. Patterson's voice on the other end was shaking. My mother's neighbor. The woman who'd lived next door to Mom for 15 years, who brought her lemon squares every Sunday, who checked on her when I was too busy building my career to visit as often as I should have. Donna Hayes was dead. The words didn't compute at first. I sat there staring at the reflection of my exhausted face in the dark monitor, trying to process what Mrs. Patterson was telling me through her tears. A heart attack, she said. Natural causes the paramedics had confirmed. She'd found Mom that afternoon when she came by to return a borrowed book. I don't remember much about the drive to Willowbrook, the small Oregon town where I'd grown up. 6 hours of highway blurred together, broken only by gas station, coffee, and the crushing weight of guilt that settled on my chest somewhere around mile 200. When had I last called her 2 weeks ago? 3. Our conversations had become perfunctory over the years, quick check-ins squeezed between meetings and deadlines. She'd ask about my work, I'd give her the highlights, she'd tell me about her garden and her job as an executive secretary at Morrison and Associates, the law firm where she'd worked for 20 years. Safe topics, surface level, never anything that required me to really see her. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The little craftsman cottage on Maple Street with its neat flower beds, and the porch swing where Mom used to read on summer evenings. Yellow crime scene tapes still fluttered from the front door, though Mrs. Patterson had assured me the police were done with their investigation. There was nothing to investigate after all. Just an unfortunate natural death of a 58-year-old woman with a previously undiagnosed heart condition. But when I walked through that door, something felt wrong. The living room was exactly as Mom had always kept it, obsessively organized, everything in its place. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged at perfect angles. The magazines on the coffee table were aligned with geometric precision. This was the house of a woman who needed control over her environment, who found comfort in order. So why was the window in her bedroom open? Mom had been paranoid about security. She checked every lock twice before bed every single night. I knew this because I'd teased her about it countless times as a teenager. I stood in her bedroom doorway, taking in the scene. The bed was made hospital corners, crisp and tight. Her reading glasses sat on the nightstand next to a well-worn paperback. But that window, the one overlooking the back garden, was open about 4 inches. And when I looked closer, I saw it. A small scratch on the hardwood floor, fresh wood exposed beneath the finish, as if something heavy had been dragged. And her medication, the bottles she kept meticulously organized in the bathroom cabinet, they were there, but her heart medication was missing. I called the police. Detective Morris, a tired-looking man in his 50s, listened patiently to my concerns. He'd been at the scene, he explained. The medical examiner had found no signs of foul play. The open window, maybe she'd wanted fresh air. The scratch could have been there for weeks. The missing medication, perhaps she'd finished the bottle and hadn't refilled it yet, or maybe the paramedics had taken it. He gave me the look I'd become familiar with over the years, the one that said I was overthinking things, seeing patterns that weren't there. Classic engineer's brain, my ex-girlfriend used to say. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something had happened here. Something that the neat, tidy narrative of a heart attack didn't explain. Melanie arrived the next day. My girlfriend of 2 years, a litigation attorney with one of Seattle's top firms, had taken emergency leave the moment I called her. She found me in Mom's study, surrounded by boxes of photographs and papers, trying to make sense of a life I realized I barely knew. We'd met at a tech conference 3 years ago, where she was representing a client in a patent dispute. She'd impressed me with her sharp mind and sharper wit, and I'd apparently impressed her with my ability to explain complex technical concepts without sounding condescending. We were good together, practical and supportive, 2 professionals building careers and a relationship with equal dedication. She was the one who suggested I needed to eat something, who went out and came back with Thai food, who sat with me while I picked at pad Thai and stared at photos of a mother I'd apparently never truly known. The funeral was small. Mom hadn't had many friends, something I'd never questioned, but now seemed strange. She'd been cordial with neighbors, polite with colleagues, but there was no close circle, no best friend, no one who really knew her. About 30 people showed up, most of them neighbors and a few people from the law firm. I shook hands and accepted condolences, feeling like I was playing a role in a play I hadn't rehearsed for. A week later, Melanie and I sat in the office of Robert Park, the elderly attorney who'd handled Mom's affairs. The office smelled of old books and lemon polish, and Robert himself looked like he'd stepped out of a 1,950 seconds legal drama, complete with wire-rimmed glasses and a three-piece suit. He slid a sealed envelope across his mahogany desk, his expression grave. This was the strange part, he explained. Donna had updated her will 6 months ago with very specific instructions. The envelope was to be given to me only after her death and only in the presence of her attorney. Inside was a photograph and a key. The photograph was old, the colors slightly faded. It showed Mom maybe in her early 30s standing next to a man I'd never seen before. She looked different younger, obviously, but there was something else. She was smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes, not the careful, controlled expression I was used to seeing. They stood in front of an old-fashioned shop, the sign above the door reading Clock Tower Seidel in elegant gold lettering. The key was vintage, ornate, the kind that looked like it belonged to a Victorian mansion or a jewelry box in a period drama. And then Robert read the will. To receive the entirety of the estate, I had to find the man in the photograph and give him the key. Only after that would Robert provide directions to a hidden safe deposit box. No other explanation. No context. Just a photograph, a key, and a bizarre scavenger hunt from beyond the grave. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and bitter. Even in death, Mom had secrets. Even now, she was controlling things, manipulating me into some elaborate game I didn't understand. Melanie put a hand on my arm, her touch grounding me before I said something I'd regret to the kindly old lawyer who was just doing his job. The estate in question was substantial. Mom's house, her car, her savings. Robert couldn't disclose the exact amount, but his expression suggested it was significant. More than a secretary's salary should have accumulated, even with careful saving over 20 years. Back at my hotel room that night, Melanie and I studied the photograph under the harsh fluorescent light. She was already on her phone, her lawyer brain-kicking into investigative mode. Within an hour, she'd found it. Clock Tower, a watch repair shop in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, still in operation. The listing showed limited hours and a note that said, "By appointment only." I called 3 times over the next 2 days. No answer. No voicemail. Just endless ringing that went nowhere. On the 3rd day, I decided to just go. Seattle was only a few hours north, and sitting in Willowbrook surrounded by Mom's things and my own spiraling thoughts was driving me crazy. Melanie came with me because that's what she did. She showed up. She stayed. She helped me carry burdens I didn't even know I had. The drive up Interstate 5 gave me too much time to think. Who was the man in the photograph? Why had Mom never mentioned him? Why this elaborate setup? The questions circled in my mind like vultures picking at the carcass of everything I thought I knew about my mother. Capitol Hill was exactly the kind of neighborhood where a place called Clock Tower would thrive. Old brick buildings, vintage shops, coffee houses with names like Zeitgeist and Victrola. The shop itself was tucked between a used bookstore and a vegan restaurant, its window display showing an array of antique timepieces that probably cost more than my car. I knocked. Once, twice. The 3rd time I heard movement inside and then a voice gravelly and irritated shouted through the door. "Close. We're closed." "I need to talk to Mr. Thorne." My voice cracked slightly. "It's about Donna Hayes." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then the locks clicked one after another and the door opened. The man who stood there was the same one from the photograph, but time had not been kind. His hair was completely white now, his face deeply lined, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes, those were the same, sharp, intelligent, and in that moment filled with something that looked like dread. "Donna." He said her name like a prayer and a curse combined. His hand gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles went white. "Why are you here? What's happened?" "She died. 3 weeks ago. Heart attack." The words came out flat, emotionless, because I couldn't let myself feel them again, not here, not now. Stephen Thorne, because it had to be him, made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. He stumbled backward, and I thought he might fall, but he caught himself against a display case. Inside, hundreds of watches ticked their collective sound, creating an eerie symphony of passing time. "No." His voice was barely a whisper. "No, she can't be. I told her. I told her to be careful. She promised me she'd be careful." That statement, those words, they hit me like a physical blow. Careful of what? What did he know? What had Mom been afraid of? He led us inside, his movements mechanical, like a man in shock. The shop was larger than it appeared from outside, stretching back into shadows filled with more timepieces, workbenches covered in tiny tools and watch parts. The sound of ticking was everywhere oppressive, a constant reminder that time marched forward whether we wanted it to or not. His office was in the back, a small room overflowing with papers, files, books. He sank into a worn leather chair and stared at me with those intelligent, devastated eyes. "You're Henry. No, Ethan. She changed it when you were 7. He rubbed his face with both hands. God. I should have done more. I should have insisted she let me help her more. I don't understand. The anger was back threading through my voice. Who are you? How did you know my mother? And what did she need to be careful about? Stephen looked at me for a long moment, then at Melanie, who'd quietly taken out her phone and was probably recording. Smart. Everything about this situation screamed legal complications. Your mother, Donna Hayes, was one of the most talented writers of her generation. He stood, moved to a bookshelf, and pulled down a hardcover book. The cover showed a stylized galaxy stars scattered across a deep purple background. The title read, The Solitary Galaxy, and beneath it the author's name, E.M. Thorne. I stared at the book, then at him, then back at the book. My mother was a secretary. She worked at a law firm. She did administrative work and came home and tended her garden and read mystery novels. She wasn't a writer. She'd never mentioned writing anything beyond grocery lists and birthday cards. Stephen opened the book to the copyright page, then to the acknowledgments. There, in elegant print, was a dedication to H, my reason for everything, and to S, who made it possible for me to be brave in the only way I could manage. H, Henry, me. She wrote under a pen name because she was terrified. Stephen's voice was thick with emotion. Your mother had severe social anxiety, Ethan. The thought of public appearances, of interviews, of anyone knowing her real identity, it paralyzed her. But she had stories. Beautiful, brilliant stories that deserved to be told, so we made a deal. I became her manager, her public face, her shield. I handled the publishers, the contracts, the book tours. E.M. Thorne appeared at events via video call, always with camera and audio issues. The publishers thought she was eccentric. They didn't know she was terrified. He pulled out more books, 5 in total, all bestsellers, all by E.M. Thorne, all written by my mother. Books I'd probably seen in bookstores and airports, never knowing they contained pieces of the woman who raised me. I want to show you something. Stephen moved to a large grandfather clock in the corner of the office, an ornate piece with a brass face and intricate woodwork. He took the key I'd brought, the one from Mom's will, and inserted it into a nearly invisible lock on the side of the clock. The front panel swung open, revealing not clock mechanisms, but a hidden safe. Inside were manuscripts, contracts, financial statements, and at the very top, a letter addressed to me in Mom's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Ethan, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell you the truth while I was alive. I'm sorry I let fear control me for so long that I missed the chance to share this part of myself with you. You deserved better than a mother who hid behind pseudonyms and locked doors. I know you'll be angry, and you have every right to be. But please, sweetheart, try to understand. The anxiety was real. The fear was real. And by the time I realized I'd built a prison for myself, I didn't know how to escape it without destroying everything. The letter went on explaining her condition, her writing, her desperate desire to provide for me while also protecting herself from the exposure she couldn't handle. She talked about Stephen, how he'd been her colleague at the law firm 30 years ago, how he'd quit to help her when her first book sold, how he'd been the only person besides me that she truly trusted. And then the final paragraphs. There's one more thing, my darling boy. I've written one last book. It's different from the others. It's the truth. It's my story. And I want you to publish it under my real name. Donna Clark. No more hiding, no more fear. I won't be here to face the consequences, but maybe that's what it takes. Maybe I can be brave in death in a way I never managed in life. The book is called The Woman in Hiding, and it's in the safe. Publish it, Ethan. Let the world see me, finally. I finished reading and realized I was crying. Melanie was beside me, her hand on my shoulder, and Stephen was openly weeping in his chair, this old man who'd loved my mother enough to spend 30 years protecting her secrets. The financial statements told their own story. Royalties from 5 best-selling novels invested wisely over 15 years. The total was staggering. $4.3 million managed, carefully, growing steadily. More money than Mom would ever have needed. More than enough to quit her job, to live comfortably, to do anything she wanted. But she'd kept working at the law firm, kept living in her small house, kept up the facade of being nothing more than a secretary. Why keep working there if she didn't need the money? Stephen's face darkened. That's where things get complicated. Your mother didn't just work at Morrison and Associates. One of the partners, Richard Sterling, he was also the attorney who handled the publishing contracts for E.M. Thorne. He was the connection between her two lives. And he knew everything. The way he said it, the bitterness in his voice sent a chill down my spine. At first it was fine. Richard was professional. He negotiated good deals. But about 5 years ago things changed. He started pushing contracts that were increasingly unfavorable. Smaller advances. Worse royalty splits. Strange clauses. I noticed. I told Donna. But every time I tried to push back, Richard would hint that maybe E.M. Thorne's real identity should be revealed. Maybe the public had a right to know. Maybe a big reveal would boost sales. Blackmail. Melanie's voice was sharp. He was blackmailing her. Not explicitly. Stephen shook his head. He was too smart for that. It was always suggestions, implications, letting Donna's fear do the work for him. She was so terrified of exposure that she'd agree to almost anything, and I couldn't stop it. Every time I tried to interfere, he'd schedule a meeting that only Donna could attend, even though she'd have a panic attack just thinking about it. He'd push her into corners where she felt she had no choice. How much did he take? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Stephen pulled out more documents. Over the past 5 years, approximately $800,000, skimmed through bad contracts, unnecessary fees, investment schemes that conveniently lost money. All perfectly legal if you didn't look too closely. All absolutely devastating if you understood he was exploiting a vulnerable woman's mental health condition. I stood up, pacing the small office. The watches ticked around me, marking seconds and minutes and hours of a life my mother had lived in fear, a life I'd been completely oblivious to. There's something else. Stephen's voice was barely audible. 2 days before she died, Donna called me. She was terrified. She said Richard had come to her house. She said they'd argued. She said he'd threatened to expose everything if she didn't sign over control of her entire estate to a trust he'd manage. She said she'd told him no. For the first time in years, she'd told him no. The room spun. My mother's death. The open window. The missing medication. The scratch on the floor. Not a heart attack. Or not just a heart attack. A confrontation. A struggle. A woman with an anxiety disorder being pushed to her absolute limit by a predator who'd been feeding on her fear for years. I need to go back to the house. I was already moving toward the door. I need to search the house. Melanie was with me, her legal mind already 3 steps ahead. If there's evidence, we need to find it before anything is disturbed or disposed of. If Richard Sterling was there before she died, there might be something. The drive back to Willowbrook was faster than the law strictly allowed. My mind raced through possibilities, through memories, through every interaction I could remember between Mom and anyone from the law firm. Had I ever met Richard Sterling, I couldn't remember. Mom had kept her work life separate, probably because it intersected with her secret life in ways she couldn't risk me discovering. We tore through that house like investigators on a crime show. Every drawer, every closet, every box in the attic. Melanie was methodical, photographing everything before we moved it. Chain of custody, she kept saying. If we find anything, we need to prove it wasn't tampered with. It was almost midnight when I found it. Or rather, when I remembered something. When I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, I'd been playing hide and seek with a neighbor's kid. I'd hidden in Mom's closet and noticed that one of the floorboards sounded different when you stepped on it. Hollow. Mom had found me there and gently steered me out, saying that space was off limits. I'd forgotten about it for over 20 years. Now I pulled back the carpet in her bedroom closet, found that board and pried it up. Beneath was a metal safe, old and heavy, built right into the floor joists. It had a combination lock, but next to it was taped a small key and a note in Mom's handwriting. Your birthday backward. My hands shook as I entered the combination. The lock clicked open. Inside wasn't money. It was documentation, evidence, proof that my mother had known she was in danger and had been preparing for this possibility. There was a journal entries dating back 5 years documenting every interaction with Richard Sterling, his threats, his demands, his gradual escalation from subtle manipulation to overt intimidation. Mom had been meticulous, noting dates, times, exact quotes when she could remember them. She'd documented the contracts, highlighting the predatory clauses. She'd tracked the money, showing exactly how much had been diverted to Richard's benefit. And at the bottom of the safe, there was an old digital voice recorder, the kind journalists used to use. The kind that looked like it was from the early 2000s, because it probably was. Mom had been prepared. She'd seen this coming. I pressed play. The sound quality was poor, tinny, and distant, like it had been recorded from a pocket or purse, but the voices were clear enough. "Donna, you're being unreasonable." That was Richard Sterling, his voice smooth and condescending. "We've had a good relationship for years. All I'm asking is that you let me help you manage your assets more efficiently." "No." Mom's voice was shaky but firm. "I don't want your help, Richard. I want you to leave me alone. I want you to stop pushing these contracts that benefit you more than me. I want you to stop using my condition against me." "Your condition," he laughed, and it was a cruel sound. "Donna, you're mentally ill. You can barely leave your house. You rely on me to handle your affairs because you're incapable of doing it yourself. Now I've been patient. I've been kind. But I need you to understand something. If you don't sign these documents, if you don't cooperate, I will tell everyone who E.M. Thorne really is. I'll hold a press conference. I'll contact every major news outlet. Your little secret will be front-page news, and you'll have to face the world you've been hiding from." There was a long pause, and then Mom's voice, stronger now. "Get out of my house. You don't understand what you're doing." His voice changed, darkened. "You think you can say no to me. After everything I've done for you, I made E.M. Thorne a success. I protected you. And this is how you repay me. You didn't protect me. You exploited me. You used my fear against me for years, but I'm done. Get out." There was the sound of movement, something knocking over, and then Richard's voice, sharp and angry. "You're making a mistake, Donna. A serious mistake. Get out." Mom's voice rose to a shout, something I'd never heard from her. "Get out of my house now." More sounds of movement, a crash, and then a short scream. Mom's voice, terrified. "No, don't. I can't breathe. I can't." Then silence. And then footsteps fast moving away. A door slamming. The recording continued for another minute, just silence and the faint sound of ticking from the antique clock in Mom's living room. Then it cut off. I sat on the floor of that closet, the recorder in my hands, and understood. Richard Sterling hadn't just exploited my mother, he'd killed her. Maybe not with his own hands, maybe not intentionally, but his confrontation had triggered the heart attack that took her life. The open window wasn't for fresh air. It was his exit route when he realized what he'd done. The missing medication wasn't missing. He'd probably taken it to cover his tracks to make sure it looked natural. Melanie was already on her phone. "We need Detective Morris back here. Now. We have evidence of a crime." But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Richard Sterling was a successful attorney. He'd have lawyers of his own. He'd have explanations. The recording was damning, but was it enough? Would it prove anything beyond reasonable doubt? And even if we could prove he'd been there, could we prove his actions directly caused her death? I spent the rest of that night reading Mom's journal cover to cover. Every entry was a knife to my heart. She'd been suffering for years and I'd been oblivious. Too busy with my career, my life, my concerns to see that the quiet, controlled woman who'd raised me was actually terrified and trapped. One entry stood out, written 3 months before she died. "I see Ethan thriving in his life, building his career, finding love with Melanie. He's everything I hoped he'd be. Strong, independent, unafraid. And I wonder if my fear has been a gift to him in some twisted way. He saw what fear did to me, how it limited me, and he chose differently. He chose bravery. I'm so proud of him. I just wish I could have chosen bravery too before it was too late." I had to put the journal down. I couldn't see the pages anymore through my tears. Detective Morris came at dawn. He listened to the recording. He read the journal. His tired face grew harder with each page. "This changes things. This changes everything. But Mr. Hayes, I need you to understand that this is going to be complicated. Richard Sterling is a prominent attorney. This recording might not be admissible in court. The journal is hearsay. And proving that he directly caused her death, that's going to be nearly impossible. Then we make it possible." Melanie's voice was steel. "We build a case so airtight that he can't wriggle out of it. We find every contract, every financial transaction, every witness who saw him manipulate Donna. We expose the pattern of exploitation. And we make sure everyone knows what he did." Over the next week, we assembled a team. Melanie brought in a partner from her firm who specialized in financial fraud. Stephen provided every contract, every email, every document from 30 years of managing Mom's career. We hired a private investigator who started tracking Richard Sterling's movements, his finances, his other clients. And then Melanie had an idea. A brilliant, audacious, completely risky idea. We published the book. Your mother's last book, The Woman in Hiding. We announce it publicly. We make a big deal about E.M. Thorne, finally revealing her identity about Donna Clark's incredible story. We create a media event, and we watch what Richard does. He'll try to stop it. I understood immediately. He'll be afraid of what's in it. He'll be afraid of the attention. Exactly. And when he tries to stop it, we'll have him on record. We'll have witnesses. We'll have proof of his continued attempts to control and manipulate even after Donna's death. It was manipulative. It was calculated. It was exactly the kind of trap that Richard Sterling had been setting for my mother for years. And I loved it. We reached out to Eleanor Vance, the editor who'd worked with E.M. Thorne for 15 years. She agreed to meet us at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle Neutral Territory. She was exactly what I'd imagined an editor at a major publishing house would be. Perfectly styled gray hair, designer glasses, an air of controlled sophistication that probably terrified junior editors and made authors feel simultaneously intimidated and safe. "I'm so sorry for your loss." She said it conventionally, but there was genuine emotion in her eyes. E.M. Thorne, your mother, was one of the most talented writers I've ever worked with. But I have to be honest, Mr. Hayes, the idea of revealing her identity now, of publishing this book under her real name, it concerns me greatly. It could damage the brand we've built. It could raise questions about the previous books, and frankly, it could expose the publishing house to litigation. From Richard Sterling, Melanie asked pointedly. Eleanor's carefully controlled expression flickered. Among others. "Miss Vance, let me be clear." I leaned forward. "I'm publishing this book. The only question is whether I do it with your publishing house or with someone else. My mother wanted this. It was her dying wish, and I'm going to honor it. May I at least read the manuscript first?" "Of course." I slid a copy across the table. "But I need you to understand something. This book isn't just my mother's story. It's a reckoning." That evening I made the announcement. Social media press released the works. The final book by E.M. Thorne would be published in 6 weeks under the author's real name, Donna Clark. The book would reveal the incredible true story behind the beloved novelist's secret identity. A major launch event was planned at Seattle's largest independent bookstore. The response was immediate and overwhelming. E.M. Thorne had millions of fans. Within hours, the announcement had tens of thousands of shares. News outlets picked it up. Entertainment websites ran speculation pieces. Who was Donna Clark? Why had she hidden for so long? What would this final book reveal? And Richard Sterling called. I was ready. Melanie was beside me, and we had the call on speaker recording everything. "Mr. Hayes, this is Richard Sterling from Morrison & Associates. I'm calling about this unfortunate announcement regarding your mother's book." "What's unfortunate about it?" "I think you're making a serious error in judgment. Your mother valued her privacy. She would never have wanted this kind of exposure. I'm calling as a family friend to advise you to reconsider." "Family friend," I let the skepticism drip from my voice. "I don't recall my mother ever mentioning you as a friend, Mr. Sterling. I handled her legal affairs for many years. I knew her well, and I know she'd be horrified by what you're planning." His voice took on a harder edge. "Furthermore, there are legal complications you may not be aware of. Contractual obligations regarding the E.M. Thorne brand, intellectual property concerns. I strongly suggest you cease this publicity campaign immediately." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Sterling?" "I'm advising you. There's a difference. Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss this properly. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that serves everyone's interests." "I have no intention of meeting with you, and the book will be published as planned." "You're making a mistake." His voice was cold now, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Just like your mother made a mistake." The line went dead. Melanie immediately sent the recording to Detective Morris and to her law firm's litigation team. "That was a threat. He just essentially admitted to having a conflict with your mother. Now we wait." I felt strangely calm. We wait for him to make the next move. The next move came 2 days later. A cease and desist letter delivered by courier from a law firm representing Richard Sterling. It claimed that the E.M. Thorne literary estate was subject to contractual obligations that prohibited the revelation of the author's identity without approval from Morrison & Associates, specifically Richard Sterling as the managing partner. It threatened legal action if we proceeded with publication. Melanie read it and started laughing. "This is insane. These contracts don't say anything remotely like that. He's just making things up, hoping you don't have your own legal counsel." "Can we use this?" "Absolutely. This is proof of his continued attempts to control your mother's work even after her death. It supports the pattern of exploitation we're documenting. Eleanor Vance called that same afternoon. She'd finished reading The Woman in Hiding. Mr. Hayes, Ethan, I need to see you. Right away. There are things in this book, things I didn't know, things I should have known. We met her at the publishing house this time. Her office was exactly what you'd expect, walls lined with bookshelves showcasing the house's successful titles, including all 5 E.M. Thorne novels. Eleanor looked shaken, her usual polish cracked. I had no idea. Her voice was quiet. I knew Richard handled the contracts, but I thought it was standard practice. I didn't know he was exploiting her. I didn't know she was that afraid. Did you suspect anything was wrong? She nodded slowly. Sometimes. There were moments when things didn't quite add up. The contracts got worse over time and I questioned it, but Richard always had explanations. He said E.M. Thorne preferred certain arrangements. He said she was difficult, demanding that I should be grateful she was willing to work with us at all, and I believed him because it was easier than questioning everything. Melanie leaned forward. Miss Vance, we believe Richard Sterling's exploitation of Donna went beyond just bad contracts. We believe his actions directly contributed to her death. Eleanor's face went pale. Oh God. We need to know everything. Every interaction Richard had with my mother that you witnessed. Every questionable contract clause. Every financial transaction that seemed off. Will you help us? She nodded. Yes, I'll help you. Whatever you need. Over the next 3 weeks, we built our case. Eleanor provided internal emails showing Richard's manipulation of contract terms. Stephen documented decades of financial transactions, highlighting the systematic siphoning of Mom's money into Richard's control. The private investigator found 2 other clients, elderly authors whom Richard had handled similarly, exploiting their trust and their vulnerabilities. Detective Morris brought in the district attorney. The recording, combined with the journal and the pattern of financial exploitation, was enough to start building a case. Maybe not murder, they said, but financial elder, abuse, fraud, possibly criminal negligence. It was something. But I wanted more than something. I wanted justice. I wanted the world to know what Richard Sterling had done. The book launch was scheduled for a Thursday evening. We'd moved it to a larger venue, a historic theater in downtown Seattle that could hold 500 people. Advance ticket sales had sold out within hours. The media was calling it the literary event of the year. The mysterious E.M. Thorne would finally be revealed and her son would tell her story. What none of them knew was that this event was also a trap. Melanie had coordinated with Detective Morris and the DA's office. They would be present, plain clothes, ready to move if Richard showed up and did anything incriminating. We'd also arranged for several cameras to be running, capturing every moment. If Richard Sterling tried to stop this, if he tried to threaten or intimidate anyone, it would all be on record. The morning of the event, I visited Mom's grave. Someone, probably Mrs. Patterson, had been maintaining it, keeping fresh flowers in the vase. The headstone was simple, just her name and dates. But soon I hoped it would say more. I'm doing this for you, Mom. I sat on the grass next to the grave, talking to her like I should have talked to her when she was alive. I'm going to make sure everyone knows how talented you were. How brave you tried to be. And I'm going to make sure Richard Sterling pays for what he did to you. The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and I let myself imagine it was her telling me she understood, telling me she was proud. By 6 that evening, the theater was filling up. I watched from backstage as readers, journalists, and curious onlookers found their seats. Eleanor was there sitting in the front row with other publishers and industry people. Stephen sat beside her, looking dignified in a dark suit, his white hair combed back, his expression solemn. Melanie was with me backstage, checking her phone constantly for updates from Detective Morris. He's here. She showed me a text. Richard just entered through the main doors. He's sitting in the back, trying to stay inconspicuous. My heart rate kicked up. Good, that's good. We want him here. The event coordinator gave me a 5-minute warning. I took deep breaths, trying to calm my nerves. I'd never done anything like this before. Public speaking wasn't my thing. I was an engineer, more comfortable with code than crowds. But this wasn't about me. This was about Mom. The lights dimmed. The crowd quieted. I walked out onto the stage and 500 faces turned to look at me. The spotlight was blinding, but I could see the crowd beyond it. All these people who'd loved E.M. Thorne's books, who'd connected with Mom's stories without ever knowing who she was. Good evening. My voice echoed through the theater. My name is Ethan Hayes, and I'm here to tell you about my mother. I'd prepared a speech, but standing there under those lights, looking out at all those expectant faces, I threw it away. I just talked. I told them about Donna Clark, the woman who'd raised me, who'd worked as a secretary, who'd kept a beautiful garden and made the best chocolate chip cookies I'd ever tasted, who'd been quiet and careful and had always seemed to carry some invisible weight on her shoulders. And then I told them about E.M. Thorne, the novelist who'd written 5 best-selling books, who'd captured readers' imaginations with her stories of lonely souls finding connection in a vast universe. The writer who'd been too afraid to let anyone see her real face. My mother had severe social anxiety. I spoke the words clearly without shame. She was terrified of public attention, of judgment, of exposure, and she created a brilliant solution. She wrote under a pen name. She used technology and a trusted friend to maintain her privacy. She found a way to share her gift with the world while protecting herself from the parts of that world that felt too overwhelming. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But there's something else you need to know. And this is the hard part. My mother's condition, her vulnerability, made her a target. Someone in a position of trust, someone who should have protected her, instead exploited her. For years, this person used her fear against her. He manipulated contracts. He diverted money. He threatened to expose her identity if she didn't comply with his demands. And when she finally found the courage to stand up to him, when she finally said no, his actions led to her death. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw cameras, flash reporters leaning forward, fingers flying over phones and tablets. I held up Mom's final book, the manuscript we'd rushed into production. This is The Woman in Hiding. It's my mother's last novel, and it's different from her others. It's her story. It's about a woman trapped by her own fears and by someone who weaponized those fears against her. It's about finding courage even if it comes too late. It's about the cost of silence and the price of speaking up. I paused, searching the back of the theater. I couldn't see Richard clearly in the darkness, but I knew he was there. My mother wanted this book published under her real name. She wanted the world to know who she was. She wanted to stop hiding. And I promised her I would make that happen no matter what obstacles I encountered. That's when Richard Sterling stood up. Even in the dim light of the theater, I could see him, could feel the rage radiating from him. Several people turned to look as he made his way toward the aisle. Mr. Hayes, his voice cut through the theater, loud and authoritative. This is irresponsible. You're damaging your mother's legacy. You're violating her privacy. You're making claims you cannot substantiate. The crowd murmured, confused by this interruption. Security moved toward Richard, but I held up a hand, stopping them. Mr. Sterling. I kept my voice calm, controlled. Thank you for joining us. I was hoping you'd be here. You're destroying everything your mother built. This book, this revelation, it's a betrayal of her wishes. She never wanted anyone to know who she was. Actually, Mr. Sterling, that's not true. She wanted to stay hidden because she was afraid. And she was afraid because people like you taught her that her fear was something to be exploited rather than supported. I don't know what you're implying, but I strongly suggest you stop this presentation immediately. There are legal ramifications to the claims you're making. Legal ramifications. I smiled, but it wasn't a kind expression. Like the legal ramifications of financial elder abuse, of exploiting a vulnerable person's disability, of using your position as an attorney to systematically steal from a client. The crowd gasped. Richard's face went red. You have no proof of any such thing. I handled your mother's contracts professionally and ethically. Any suggestion otherwise is slander. Then you won't mind if we listen to something? I nodded to the tech booth. A moment later, audio filled the theater. Mom's voice shaky but determined. Richard's voice threatening and cruel. The argument, the crash, the scream. The theater was dead silent as the recording played. You could have heard a pin drop. When it ended, Richard Sterling stood frozen in the aisle, his face ashen. That was recorded 3 days before my mother died. I spoke into the silence. That's Richard Sterling, a partner at Morrison & Associates, the law firm where my mother worked. That's him in her home, threatening her, intimidating her, trying to force her to sign over control of her assets. And at the end, that's the sound of my mother having the heart attack that killed her. Lies. Richard's voice was strangled. That recording, it's taken out of context, it's been edited, it's not what it sounds like. Detective Morris and 2 uniformed officers were already moving down the aisle. Richard saw them coming and tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The crowd parted, giving the police a clear path. Richard Sterling, you're under arrest for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult fraud, and we're investigating potential charges related to the death of Donna Clark Hayes. Detective Morris's voice was firm and official as he read Richard his rights. Richard tried to resist, tried to argue, tried to maintain his dignity as they handcuffed him, but there was no dignity left. Everyone in that theater had heard what he'd done. The cameras had captured everything. By morning, it would be national news. As they let him out, Richard looked back at me. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw it, the realization that he'd been beaten. That all his manipulation, all his careful planning, all his exploitation had been for nothing. He'd underestimated a terrified woman who'd been more brave than he ever gave her credit for. She'd documented everything. She'd left evidence. She'd protected her son even from beyond the grave. And he'd underestimated me. He'd thought I'd be easy to control, easy to intimidate, just like he'd thought my mother was. He'd been wrong. The theater erupted after Richard was removed. Questions shouted from every direction, cameras flashing, reporters rushing the stage, but I wasn't done yet. Please. I held up my hands, waiting for quiet. There's more I need to say. It took a few minutes, but eventually the crowd settled. This story isn't just about my mother and what happened to her. It's about something bigger. It's about how we treat people who are vulnerable. How we respond when someone tells us they're afraid or struggling. Do we support them or do we exploit them? Do we help them find their courage or do we use their fear as a weapon? I looked out at the audience at all those faces. My mother spent 30 years hiding because she couldn't face the world, but she still wanted to contribute. She still had stories to tell. And one person, someone who should have helped her, chose instead to hurt her. That can't be allowed to stand. That can't be something we just accept. I held up the book again. The Woman in Hiding is my mother's final gift to all of you. It's beautifully written, heartbreaking, and hopeful, but more than that, it's a warning. It's a reminder that the most vulnerable among us need protection, not predation. That mental illness isn't a weakness to exploit. That fear isn't a tool for manipulation. The crowd erupted into applause. It started in the front row with Eleanor and Stephen and spread back through the entire theater. People stood. The ovation went on for minutes. When it finally quieted, I spoke again. All proceeds from this book will go to the Donna Clark Hayes Foundation, which we're establishing to support writers with mental health challenges. My mother couldn't speak up for herself, but maybe we can speak up for others like her. Maybe we can make sure this doesn't happen again. More applause. I saw people crying, including Eleanor, who was openly weeping in the front row. Stephen looked like he'd aged 10 years and gotten 10 years younger, at the same time grief and relief warring on his face. The rest of the evening was a blur. Interviews with reporters, signing books for readers, accepting condolences and congratulations in equal measure. Melanie stayed by my side through all of it, her hand in mine, anchoring me when the attention threatened to overwhelm me. I understood a little better what Mom must have felt, the exposure, the vulnerability of having so many eyes on you, but I also felt something she never got to feel. I felt proud. The criminal trial took 8 months. Richard Sterling hired the best defense attorneys his money could buy, but it wasn't enough. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording, the journal, the financial records, Eleanor's testimony about contract manipulation, Stephen's testimony about years of exploitation. The 2 other victims, the private investigator, had found elderly authors who came forward to share their own stories of how Richard had manipulated them. The prosecution built a damning case. They proved that Richard had systematically exploited Mom's disability for financial gain over a 5-year period. They proved that his confrontation with her had directly led to the heart attack that killed her. They couldn't prove murder, not in the legal sense, but they proved enough. Richard Sterling was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, and a host of other charges. His law license was revoked. His assets were frozen and would be used to make restitution to his victims. Morrison and Associates, the firm where Mom had worked for 20 years, fired him publicly and settled a civil suit with me for an undisclosed amount that I immediately donated to the foundation. But more than the criminal justice, there was the court of public opinion. Richard Sterling became a cautionary tale. Articles were written about how mental health disabilities make people vulnerable to exploitation. Law schools used the case as an example of professional ethics violations. He became exactly what he'd always threatened to make my mother: exposed, judged, destroyed by public attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Woman in Hiding became a phenomenon. It debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for 26 weeks. It won awards. It was translated into 40 languages. Book clubs read it and discussed it. Schools assigned it. It became part of the conversation about mental health, about vulnerability, about the power dynamics between those who help and those who need help. Reviews called it Mom's masterwork. Her most honest, most powerful story. And knowing that she'd written it while being actively exploited, while living in fear, while gathering evidence against her tormentor, that made it even more remarkable. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, we held a dedication ceremony. The headstone had been replaced with a larger one, black granite with gold lettering. Donna Clark Hayes, E.M. Thorne, beloved mother, brilliant writer, courageous woman, the woman who wrote Galaxies, Into the Darkness, and Found Her Light. At the end, Stephen had suggested the epitaph, pulling words from one of Mom's novels. It was perfect. A crowd of about 50 people gathered for the dedication. Readers, writers, representatives from mental health organizations. Eleanor was there, having become a fierce advocate for author rights and mental health awareness in the industry. Detective Morris came in his dress uniform, representing the law enforcement community's commitment to protecting vulnerable victims. I spoke briefly, thanking everyone for coming, for honoring Mom's memory, for carrying forward her legacy. And then Stephen spoke, his voice thick with emotion, telling stories about the brilliant, fearful, kind woman he'd known and protected for 30 years. After the ceremony, as people were leaving, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 25, clutching a worn copy of The Woman in Hiding. "Mr. Hayes, I just wanted to thank you." Her voice was soft, hesitant. "I have social anxiety too. Really bad. And reading your mom's story, knowing she accomplished so much despite being so afraid, it gives me hope. It makes me feel like maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I can still do something meaningful with my life." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You're not broken. And my mom would want you to know that your fear doesn't define you. Your courage does. Even small acts of courage. Even just showing up today took courage, didn't it?" She nodded, smiling through her own tears. "Thank you. Thank you for sharing her story." As she walked away, Melanie squeezed my hand. "Your mom is helping people. Still, that's her real legacy." We got married that fall, a small ceremony on the coast with Stephen as my best man and Eleanor in attendance. We bought a house in Seattle close to the clock tower shop, which Stephen still ran even though he was in his 70s. He'd become family, the connection to Mom that I'd never had while she was alive. The foundation grew. We awarded grants to dozens of writers struggling with mental health issues. We funded therapy for artists who couldn't afford it. We created mentorship programs pairing established writers with emerging ones who needed support. Every month I received letters from people whose lives had been changed by the foundation's help, and every month I wished Mom could see what her courage had created. Because that's what it was in the end. Courage. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Mom had been afraid her entire life, but in the end she'd found a way to fight back. She'd documented everything. She'd prepared evidence. She'd written her truth. She'd protected me, even though she knew she might not be there to see justice done. I used to be angry that she'd hidden so much from me, that she'd lived this entire secret life as E.M. Thorne and never told me. That she'd suffered Richard's exploitation for years without reaching out for help, but I understood now. The fear was real, the disability was real. She'd been doing the best she could with the tools she had. And in the end, she'd been braver than anyone gave her credit for, including herself. 2 years after the book launch, I was invited to speak at a conference on financial crimes against vulnerable adults. I accepted, even though public speaking still wasn't my favorite activity. I owed it to Mom to keep telling her story, to keep the warning alive. Standing at the podium, looking out at law enforcement officers, prosecutors, social workers, and advocates, I felt Mom's presence. Not in any supernatural sense, but in the way her story lived on, in the way it continued to make a difference. "My mother was a victim," I began, "but that's not all she was. She was also a fighter. She couldn't fight in the traditional ways. She couldn't confront her abuser directly. She couldn't overcome her fear enough to speak out publicly. But she found another way. She documented. She recorded. She prepared. And when she was gone, she made sure the truth could still come out." I paused, gathering my thoughts. For anyone working with vulnerable populations, that's the lesson. Sometimes the people you're trying to help can't speak up in the moment. Sometimes they're too afraid, too compromised, too controlled. But that doesn't mean they're helpless. Give them tools. Believe them. Watch for the signs. And understand that abuse of vulnerable people happens in professional settings by people in positions of trust every single day. After the speech, a prosecutor approached me. We've started a protocol in our office. Anytime we see a case where someone with documented mental health issues is involved in financial transactions with their attorney or caregiver, we flag it for review. We're calling it the Donna Hayes Protocol. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. She would have liked that. She would have been proud. That evening back home, I sat in my office and pulled out one of Mom's early books, The Solitary Galaxy. I'd read it for the first time after her death, and I'd been stunned by how good it was. The prose was beautiful, the characters complex, the themes profound. How had she created this while living in fear? How had she found the strength to write about hope and connection when she felt neither? I opened to a random page and read. The universe is vast and indifferent, but within it we create pockets of warmth. We build fires in the darkness. We tell stories to keep the night at bay. And sometimes, if we're very brave, we share those stories with others, hoping they'll add their own light to ours. That's how we survive the cold, together. Mom had written that, the woman who couldn't leave her house without anxiety attacks, who couldn't face a crowd, who couldn't even put her real name on her books. She'd written about courage and connection and community. And in the end, she'd lived it. She'd reached out to Stephen. She'd trusted Eleanor eventually. She'd left me everything I needed to finish what she'd started. She'd created a community, after all, just not in the way she'd expected. Melanie found me there, tears streaming down my face, holding Mom's book like a lifeline. She's still with you. Melanie sat beside me, her head on my shoulder. In every person, the foundation helps. In every reader who finds comfort in her words. In every vulnerable person who's a little bit safer because of what you did. She's still here. I nodded, unable to speak. That night I dreamed of Mom. Not as she'd been in life, careful and controlled and afraid, but as she must have been when she wrote, when it was just her and the words and the stories. Free, brave, fully herself. In the dream, we sat together in a garden filled with stars. She was reading from The Woman in Hiding, and when she finished, she looked at me and smiled. Asterisk. You did good, sweetheart. You finished it for me. Asterisk. I woke with sunlight streaming through the window and Melanie beside me, and for the first time since Mom died, I felt at peace. We'd done it. We'd honored her memory. We'd exposed Richard Sterling. We'd protected others from the same fate. We'd taken a story of exploitation and fear and transformed it into something powerful and protective. Justice had been served. But more than that, Mom's story had been told. Her real story, not just the novel she'd written, but the life she'd lived. The struggles and the courage and the ultimate triumph of a woman who refused to let her fear have the final word. I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop. The foundation needed a new grant proposal reviewed. There were emails from writers seeking support. There was work to be done carrying forward the legacy Mom had created. As I worked, I thought about that young woman at the cemetery, the one who'd said Mom's story gave her hope. That was the real victory. Not Richard Sterling in prison, though, that mattered. Not the best-selling book, though, that spread Mom's message far and wide. The real victory was every person who read Mom's story and decided they didn't have to let their fear control them. Every person who found a little more courage because Mom had shared her truth. 3 months after the trial ended, I received a letter. No return address, just a postmark from a small town in Oregon I'd never heard of. Dear Ethan, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe you get thousands of letters. Maybe mine will just be one more in a pile you never get to, but I had to write anyway. I was Richard Sterling's client for 2 years. He told me the same things he told your mother, that I was special, that he believed in me, that he was protecting me from a cruel industry. He made me sign contracts I didn't understand. He took money I never saw, and when I tried to leave, he threatened to destroy my career before it even began. Asterisk. I was going to kill myself. I had the pills in my hand. I'd written the note. And then I saw your mother's book in the bookstore window. I don't know why I went in. I don't know why I bought it. But I did. I read it in one sitting. And then I read your interviews. I learned what your mother had done, how she documented everything, how even in death she'd fought back. And I realized I could fight too. I went to the FBI. I told them everything. They said my testimony combined with your mother's evidence and the other victims who'd come forward would ensure Sterling never hurt anyone again. I'm writing now. Real writing under my own name with an agent who actually respects me. I'm not hiding anymore. Because your mother showed me I didn't have to. Thank you for finishing her story. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. You saved my life. Both of you did. With gratitude, Sarah, I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Melanie found me like that, sitting at the kitchen table, clutching the paper like it was something sacred. Another one, she asked softly, sitting beside me. I nodded. There had been others. Not many, but enough. Enough to know that what we'd done mattered. Enough to know that Mom's courage had rippled outward, touching lives she'd never know, saving people she'd never meet. She would be so proud of you, Melanie whispered, taking my hand. But that wasn't quite right. I shook my head, finally finding my voice. She would be proud of times herself, asterisk. This was always her fight. I just made sure people heard her. On what would have been Mom's 60th birthday, I went back to the cemetery. I brought fresh flowers, sunflowers this time, bright and bold and impossible to ignore. Nothing like the shy violets she used to plant in our garden, and everything like the woman she'd become in those final years. I sat beside her grave for a long time, watching clouds drift across an impossibly blue sky. I told her about the foundation, about the writers we'd helped, about the new laws being proposed to protect authors from predatory agents. I told her about Sarah's letter and the others like it. I told her about the literary scholarship we'd established in her name for writers who'd survived abuse or exploitation. We're calling it the Thorne Fellowship, I said aloud, not caring if anyone heard me talking to a gravestone. For writers who refuse to hide, I think you'd like that. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees overhead, and I could almost hear her voice in it. Asterisk. I love it, sweetheart. Thank you. Asterisk. You know, I continued, I used to be so angry that you didn't tell me, that you carried this alone for so long. But I understand now. You were protecting me. You were protecting yourself. And you were building something, evidence, documentation, a case that couldn't be denied. You were planning your revenge from the very beginning, weren't you? Another gust of wind. Another whisper of sound that might have been laughter. You were brilliant, Mom. Braver than anyone knew. Stronger than you ever gave yourself credit for. And I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't understand how much courage it took just to get up every morning and keep writing, keep fighting, keep surviving. My voice broke. I'm sorry you had to fight alone for so long. But she hadn't been alone, not really. She'd had her words, her stories, her characters who faced down their fears and emerged victorious. Every book she'd written had been practice preparation for the final confrontation she knew was coming. The Woman in Hiding wasn't just a novel. It was a battle plan, a confession, a testimony, a weapon forged in silence and deployed with devastating precision. My mother had been a warrior in hiding, and I'd been too blind to see it. I see you now, I whispered. Finally, fully, I see you. And Mom, you're magnificent. That evening, Melanie and I hosted a small gathering at our apartment. Just a few people, Detective Morrison, who'd become a friend. Janet, who'd started writing her own memoir. 2 writers from the foundation, who'd become like family. And David, who'd flown in from Chicago just for the occasion. We raised glasses of wine, cheap red, Mom's favorite, and shared stories. Not sad stories, though. There were tears. Stories about Mom's wicked sense of humor, her terrible cooking, her habit of leaving books in every room of the house. Stories about the woman she'd been before fear had narrowed her world, and the woman she'd somehow remained despite everything. To Donna, David said, his voice thick with emotion. Who taught us that being afraid doesn't mean being defeated? To Thorne, Janet added. Who proved that the pen really is mightier than the sword? To Mom, I said quietly. Who fought her war in silence and won her victory in truth? We drank. We laughed. We cried. And as the evening wore on and conversation flowed, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it had transformed into something else. Something that felt almost like joy. Because Mom's story hadn't ended in fear. It had ended in triumph. It had ended in exposure and justice and change. It had ended with lives saved and truth told and a predator caged. It had ended exactly the way she'd wanted it to, even if she hadn't lived to see it. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat at my desk and opened Mom's last notebook. I'd read it dozens of times, but tonight I turned to the very last page, the one I'd avoided for months because it hurt too much. The entry was dated 3 weeks before she died. If you're reading this, Ethan, then I'm gone. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the secrets, sorry for the burden I'm leaving you, sorry for not being braver sooner. Asterisk. But I'm not sorry for fighting back. I'm not sorry for documenting everything. I'm not sorry for writing the truth even when it terrified me. Asterisk. Richard Sterling thought he could control me through fear. He thought he could silence me with threats. He thought that because I was afraid I was powerless. Asterisk. He was wrong. Fear didn't make me weak. It made me careful. It made me methodical. It made me document every conversation, save every contract record, every threat. Fear made me prepare. Asterisk. And preparation made me dangerous. I know you'll finish this for me, sweetheart. I know you'll make sure the truth comes out. Not because you're fearless, you're not nobody is, but because you're brave. And bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Asterisk. You learned that from me. Even when I couldn't say it out loud, even when I hid behind pen names and locked doors and carefully constructed walls, I was still teaching you. I was still showing you how to survive, how to fight, how to win. Asterisk. I'm sorry I couldn't be braver in life, but I'm brave now in death, because I know you'll tell my story. I know you'll expose Richard Sterling. I know you'll protect the next writer who walks into his office desperate and vulnerable and looking for someone to believe in them. Asterisk. You'll protect them for me. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for being my son. Thank you for being strong enough to carry this. Thank you for loving me even when you didn't fully understand me. And thank you for finishing my story. I love you always. Mom. I closed the notebook gently, tears streaming freely now. I love you too, Mom, I whispered into the quiet apartment, and I promise I'll keep telling your story. I'll keep fighting your fight. I'll make sure every writer who needs help finds it. I'll make sure no one else has to hide the way you did. I'll make sure you're never forgotten. Richard Sterling was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He'd be 74 when he was released if he was released. His license was permanently revoked. His agency dissolved. His reputation destroyed. But that wasn't the victory, not really. The victory was the E.M. Thorne Foundation, which in its first year alone had helped 37 writers escape predatory contracts. The victory was the new legislation being drafted in 3 states, legislation inspired by Mom's story, designed to protect authors from exploitation. The victory was Sarah writing under her own name, no longer afraid. The victory was Janet finally telling her own truth. The victory was every person who read The Woman in Hiding and recognized themselves in its pages, who saw their own fear reflected back at them and decided, like Mom, to fight anyway. The victory was the conversation, the awareness, the change. Richard Sterling had tried to prey on vulnerability. He'd tried to turn Mom's fear into profit, her dreams into leverage, her silence into power, his power. He'd failed. Because Mom's vulnerability had also been her strength. It had made her empathetic. It had made her careful. It had made her prepare. It had made her document everything, save everything, plan for every contingency. She'd turned her fear into a weapon and it had destroyed him. The predator had become the prey. The hunter had been caught in his own trap. And the woman he'd tried to erase had instead become immortal, her words living on her story, touching millions, her courage, inspiring generations. I keep a photograph on my desk now. Mom, young and radiant, holding her first published novel. She's smiling, really smiling, not the careful, controlled expression she wore in later years. She looks fearless. But I know better now. She wasn't fearless. She was afraid. Deeply, profoundly afraid. She wrote that book anyway. She kept writing through years of abuse and exploitation and fear. She documented everything. She prepared. She fought back. That's not fearlessness. That's something far more powerful. That's courage. Raw, hard-won, breathtaking courage. Every morning I look at that photograph and I remember fear doesn't make you weak. It's what you do with the fear that matters. Mom was afraid, but she was also brave, and in the end, her bravery won. That's the thing about truth. You can hide it, you can run from it, you can try to bury it under threats and manipulation and fear, but eventually somehow it finds its way to light. Eventually the secrets are revealed. Eventually justice comes. It took losing my mother to understand that. It took grief and anger and a desperate search for answers to uncover what had been hidden for so long. But in the end, the truth prevailed. The woman in hiding stepped into the light, and the predator who'd hunted her was exposed for what he really was. Not a protector, not a professional, not someone to be trusted. A predator, plain and simple. And predators belong in cages. But this story, Mom's story, our story, it's bigger than Richard Sterling. It's bigger than justice or revenge or even vindication. It's about the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, the ways we survive and fight and ultimately triumph over those who try to break us. It's about fear and courage existing side by side, neither one canceling out the other. It's about a woman who was afraid but rode anyway, who was trapped but planned her escape, who died but still won. Mom's story didn't end with her death. It began there. And it will continue as long as there are people who need to hear it, who need to know that vulnerability isn't weakness, that fear doesn't make you powerless, and that even in death you can still fight back. Even in death you can still win. Even in hiding you can still be seen. Even in silence your voice can roar. My name is Ethan Hayes. My mother was Donna Clark, also known as E.M. Thorne. She was a writer, a survivor, a warrior in hiding. She was afraid and brave, vulnerable and strong, hidden and ultimately, finally, gloriously seen. And this was her story. Our story. The story of how we unveiled the predator's secret and reclaimed the life he'd tried to steal. The story of how love and truth and courage can outlast fear. The story of how even the quietest voice, when it finally speaks, can change everything. This is how she won. This is her legacy. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure the world never forgets it.